Hello. Let's see. This looks a little bit cattywampus. That's a little bit better. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. All right, so it might just be you and me. I don't know. I didn't hear from Leanne today about how many people signed up. So, okay, good. All right, so we're doing a pretty popular sequence of mine. Some people, for whatever reason, they like certain sequences, and other sequences are more challenging, so maybe people don't like them as much. As I often say, what's important when practicing is not whether we like something or not, but really, whether it's good for us or not. Let me adjust this camera a little bit. So this is a sequence, whether a sequence is easy or not, or whether people like it or not, it's always my intention for it to be good for us on some level. So this is my hips and twists sequence. And it consists of 2 hip openers and then 2 twists. And so we'll start with the hip opener, which is the half butterfly. Okay, so we're just going to take our right leg straight, left foot to the inside of the thigh, and we'll fold forward and down. And since it's just you and me today, I'm just going to practice with you. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we might have just kind of a quiet practice today.
Thank you. I will. And I'm going to keep my mic off only because I don't want my dogs to start barking.
No, yeah, definitely keep it off, and you can play any music you want in the background. So we're stretching the back of the right thigh. And again, this needs to be within the range of what we feel is safe. You can use props under your forearms, forehead. You could also sit on a prop. But don't use props if you don't need them. All right, we're going to be here for 5 minutes. So right about halfway. So come on up and then let's switch sides. So we're bringing the left leg straight, right foot to the inside of the thigh. This is half butterfly. And again, we'll just fold forward and down. You want to feel that stretch in the back of the left thigh. And for anyone who might be watching later, you want to avoid like pulling or yanking yourself down. So just try and relax into it. All right, so we'll gradually make our way back onto our back for a rebound. And we just want to relax, be still, and feel the sensations while they are there. You might find, like for me, the sensations dissipate rather quickly and they become very, very subtle. Then let's bring the legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze. This is the leg cradle. And we're just using that to bring a little bit of balance and relief to our body, places in our body that were worked by the last two postures. And then we'll do our first of two twists that are part of this sequence. So this is a cattail. So let's go ahead and we'll take our left leg, bring it up to the left, or bring it up toward the ceiling. Drop it over to the right. Let me get this out of my microphone out of my pocket. We're going to move the legs apart as wide as they will go. So that might be very wide. It might not be wide at all, but we take them as wide as they'll go. And then we're going to bend the bottom knee, the right knee, and reach back and grab the right foot with our left hand. Okay, and what we want to feel is a stretch at the front of the right thigh. And this is a hips and twist sequence, which means today we'd like to approach cattail as a twist. Now, inherently, it is a twist. It's not usually super deep, but if you can see me on your screen, you can see that my pelvis is basically facing the ground, and then my chest is facing the left wall, or if I lean back, it's even maybe facing the ceiling a bit. So that's in essence what a spinal twist is. The pelvis and the chest move in opposite directions. If I do this, then it's no longer a twist, okay? If I do this, then it's no longer a twist, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now, as usual, I can have my left leg, which is this leg in front of me, straight or bent. I can have it closer to my face or further down away from me. And all of those options will change what I feel. I can pull the right foot in towards my buttocks, or while holding the foot, I can kick it back, and that might draw me a little deeper into the back bend. Okay, so how do you know which one you should do? You just need to experiment and try different things out and see how they feel in your body. For instance, today, that kicking back variation really kind of tweaks my knee. Doesn't always do that, but for whatever reason today, my knee is feeling very sort of tender and yeah, fragile. So what that means is I'm not going to pursue that avenue. I'll just continue holding my foot in today, and then maybe tomorrow or next week, the other variation will feel good or appropriate. As I mentioned before, knees, ankles are statistically, the two areas that are injured the most doing any kind of exercise. So these are areas where we want to be very, very cautious when we practice. It's usually you can have your head up on your hand like I'm doing, but you can rest it on your upper arm, put it on a block, folded blanket, or even lay it on the ground depending on what position your body is in. Because it is hips and twists, we do want to lay back as much as we can into the twist and get as much out of it as we can, while still hopefully stretching the front of that right thigh. Got about 2 minutes left here. All right, let's go ahead and unwind. We'll come back onto our back for a few moments. And just relax and feel the rebound, very brief rebound. And then let's take it over to the other side. So we extend the right leg up to the ceiling, drop it over to the left. Again, I'm going to prop my head up, and I recommend doing that at the start of the pose. If you want to change it later, you may. Bringing the legs apart, we bend the knee, reach back, and grab the foot. And we're stretching the front of the thigh. Leaning back brings you a deeper twist and also back bend. Should mention this pose is a back bend as well, and it's our only back bend in today's class. So I recommend really kind of exploring that aspect of it. See if you can find the back bend in the pose. And when I say that, I mean feel that it is a back bend. Feel that you're going into a back bend when you do this. This can be a slightly awkward pose to hold for the full 5 minutes because we're holding this foot in. It can get kind of tiresome or uncomfortable. So do the best you can. This is generally a pretty relaxing sequence. Most people enjoy this sequence. And like I said at the beginning, it tends to be a popular sequence of mine. But this pose can be somewhat challenging. Sometimes the hardest thing about practicing yin yoga is just the patience. The mind has a tendency to race about. And so when our mind is racing, we can feel a sort of tension in the body, as though the body wants also to race. If you look at modern society, we have been promised for a long time that through the advancement of technology that we would live lives of leisure, that appliances, computers, smartphones, all of these things would speed up processes that were very labor intensive, automobiles, all these things. And that one day we would just be sitting around enjoying ourselves. All the work would be done by machines and technology. And yet, if we look at what's really happening, we live some of the busiest lives, I think, of any human beings who've ever lived on the planet. And a lot of this busyness, I think, results from this sort of busyness in our mind. So very often we slow down like we do in yin. We can feel sort of the friction, if you will. As our body becomes still, the mind continues to race, and we can sort of feel that tension as though we want to get up and move or go do something. You may or may not experience this in yin. Most people experience this in meditation, at least at the beginning. Even if that feeling subsides after doing meditation for a little while, if you meditate for longer periods of time, very often again. So while you might be okay meditating for 5 or 10 or maybe even 30 minutes, if you meditate for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 3 days, very often at a certain point, we might start to feel that kind of anxiousness return. However, if you do enough, very often it goes away again. And there is a very deep sense of peace that can arise. All right, let's go ahead and unwind, and we will come back onto our back. Let's relax and just feel that rebound. So on the surface, the sequence is 2 hips, 2 hip openers, and 2 twists. Underneath the surface, it's a very complete yin practice, articulating the spine through all its major articulations, articulating or stretching the muscles, the major muscle groups in the hips and the legs. Let's bring our legs in now. We'll give them a little squeeze, shake it out with a little bit of movement. And then when you're ready, we'll hinge up to seated. And we'll take a look at half dragonfly now. So what we'd like to do is, usually this is easiest if we turn to face the long side of the mat, like I'm doing here. Feel free to sit up on something. Feel free to use the props, but there's no one obvious way to use them other than the strap. And I'll go over that with you. So legs are straight. It doesn't really matter whether your feet point or flex. It's up to you. Then we're going to fold over our left foot like so. What we want to feel is a stretch in our right waist. So if you feel it here, then just stay with that. If you don't, you begin to roll or to stack the right shoulder over the left shoulder until you feel the stretch. Now feel free to use a strap instead of holding the foot, mostly because maybe you have long legs and shorter arms and maybe a shorter torso. Proportion definitely plays a role in our yoga practice that's often overlooked by both students and teachers. So many students who aren't able to do this might assume that they are not flexible, and when in reality they might be very flexible, they just might have really long Amazon legs and short T-Rex arms. Of course, it might be flexibility. And again, someone with a sharp eye for such things can tell you what likely the issue is. What's important, again, is not that we're able to grab our foot or that we look pretty, but that we feel the stretch. So ideally, we feel both the stretch here in our hips and we feel a stretch here in our waist because, as I said earlier, this is a very complete yin practice, and we are working the hips, but we're also working the spine simultaneously. little more than halfway. It's not a bad time to check in at this point, just see how everything's going, how intense the stretch is. If you need to readjust, you might find the stretch has dissipated at this point, and it really is up to you whether you try and pursue that as a deeper stretch. So you might find that your body invites you to go a little deeper and you take that invitation. You might find that even though you could go further, that you don't really feel like pursuing that. And that's totally fine. And then you might even find that even though you have been fairly deep in the posture and that it's been fairly rewarding, that you feel that it's best to back off at this point a little bit. Maybe you came in a little too hot, a little too deep, and you now feel that it's best to ease off a little bit. So this is another possibility. And as always, none of them are the right or wrong approach. Each of these could be correct or incorrect depending on the situation that we find ourselves in. 1 minute left. Okay, so we're switching sides. Take your time. There's no rush doing that. Usually if yin postures are working as they're supposed to, we feel a sort of desire to move slowly out of the postures. We might come into them very quickly, but then we want to come out of them slowly very often. And that's because of the success of the posture. I said we come into them quickly, but that's actually not true. We actually take 5 minutes to get into the posture, right? So even though I position myself very quickly, it's the time that I spend here that's slowly taking me deeper and making the posture more intense. So that's why, relatively speaking, we're taking 5 minutes to come into it, and we might take, 10 seconds, 30 seconds to get out of it. Comparatively, it's a very short amount of time. So that's why we can feel that sort of sensitivity and vulnerability there. What took 5 minutes to create, we are actually unwinding in a very relatively short amount of time. What took the joints 5 minutes to acclimate to, we are undoing very, very quickly. 4 minutes left. Again, if you can get both the thigh and the waist, that's ideal. Sometimes it's very small little adjustments that you make that allow you to do that. Some days it's just not possible. And for me, today seems one of those days, mostly getting it in my leg. I don't feel it in my waist as much. That might change a few minutes into the stretch. So sometimes when I check back in at the halfway mark, I'll notice that, oh, okay, now I feel it elsewhere in my body. So this posture is both bringing the spine into what's called lateral flexion, which is a sideways movement. It stretches the left side of the spine and compresses the right side, both of which are good for the spine. And it also is a groin stretch or adductor stretch, stretching these muscles here on the inside of the thigh. From an energetic perspective, it works the liver and gallbladder channel, which are a yin-yang pair. They're a couple, if you will, in the Taoist conception of the energy in the body. Very important for things like vision, and also planning for the future, making plans, things like that. So these energy channels affect us physically, they affect us emotionally, and mentally, as well as spiritually. So we get a lot of benefit from these stretches, from their perspective, anyway. Just about 30 seconds left in this posture. This can be an awkward pose for many. It's awkward for me, for sure. So awkward often means challenging. So just do the best that you can with it. We're almost done. Okay, let's go ahead and unwind from that. We'll come back onto our back and just relax for a few moments, feeling the rebound. And let's bring our legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze. Again, using the movement as a balm, as a technique to create balance and relieve the joints and muscles that were stressed or worked in that last set. And then we finish with a twist called Twisted Roots, which is a variation of the most common twist that we do in yin, which is twisted roots. So at this posture, make sure you know your left and your right. So you know, if you need to do the little trick with your hand, this is your L on your left side. What you want to do is take your left knee over your right. You can lock the ankles if you'd like, but it's not necessary. And then you're just going to take your hips over to the left, which will probably feel a bit awkward, right? And it feels awkward because, again, it's the legs doing the reverse of what we're doing. That is what we're used to. So this tends to feel a little bit unusual. Now, is it important if my knees or my shoulder touch the ground? No, doesn't matter. If you like having your shoulder or your knee on the ground, go ahead and do that. If you like to put something under your knees or your shoulder, like a block or a blanket, please feel free. But keep in mind, we are trying to use the weight of the legs and the weight of the arm to help us create the twist. So again, if I try too much to make myself comfortable, then I might miss the stress, the beneficial stress that the pose is designed to bring. Now again, we're targeting out here in the outside of the waist and the outside of the right hip. And that's why we put the legs in this position, because this leg, the left leg, is pulling my right femur, which is my thigh bone, into what's called adduction. And that tends to stretch these muscles out here. And I definitely feel the stretch there. If you don't feel it, you can try playing around with the position of your legs. So you can drop them down or bring them up higher. You might find a sweet spot, or you might find several sweet spots where you get a nice stretch into the outside of the waist and hip there. Feel free to put your arms wherever you like. in your head, wherever you like. But I do recommend positioning them consciously, which means that you're aware of how you positioned your arm. I was saying in a class that I taught yesterday, a vinyasa class, I was teaching everybody downward dog. And I said that, your downward dog can be different than what I describe, but I ask that you, A, are aware that it is different, and then B, that you know why. If I were to ask you, why are you pointing your fingers in that direction? Why are your feet together instead of apart, like I described? That you know why you're doing what you're doing. That's the most important thing. So if you're like, oh, I don't know, or I didn't realize that that's what was doing, then that starts to become problematic. If you say, oh, I point my fingers in that direction because if I point them in the direction that you say, it hurts my shoulder. That's a perfectly good explanation. Or it could be, my other teacher told me to do it this way, and I prefer that. That's fine as well. But I don't know why, or I just like that better, something like that isn't really a good explanation. It's a little bit like when we asked our parents, why we have to do something, and they say just because, things like that. I think I've shared this story with most of my students at some point or another, but I'll tell it again just for the sake of anyone who may be watching this, listening, who's unaware of it. They did an experiment with monkeys where they put monkeys in a cage that could, it was a metal cage, and an electric shock could be sent through the cage. And what they did is they put a ladder in the middle of the cage, and they hung a bunch of bananas from the top of the cage. So if a monkey climbed the ladder, they could easily access the bananas. So monkeys like bananas. And what happened is a monkey would climb up on the ladder. And when they did that, all the other monkeys who were still on the floor of the cage would get an electric shock. Well, this happened a few times, but the monkeys aren't stupid. They figured it out after a while. And anytime one of the monkeys tried to go up and get the bunch of bananas, they would actually jump on the monkey and beat it up. So after a little while, all the monkeys in the cage learned that even though there's a nice, ripe bunch of bananas there, and there's a way to get to them, no one's going to get the bananas because no one wanted to get an electric shock. So this is a type of culture, you might say, that developed, right? All right, let's switch sides. So make sure you know your left and your right. It's going to be the right knee over the left, and then down to the right this time. So how would we describe that culture? We describe that culture like, I don't know if you could hear that thunder. That was a huge thunderclap. No one likes getting shocked. And even though we like bananas, we're all going to sacrifice the bananas so that no one has to get shocked. Okay, sounds reasonable, right? So that was the culture. But what if you introduced a foreigner into that culture who didn't understand what was going on? So that's exactly what the scientists who were conducting the experiment did, is they took one of the monkeys out and they replaced it with a new monkey who did not know what had happened, didn't know the history of that culture. You could say that monkey's culture inside that cage. So the monkey gets in there and it sees the ladder and it sees the bananas and it thinks, these guys are crazy. I'm going to go ahead and get those bananas. And so it tries to climb up and all the monkeys jump on it and beat it up. maybe it tries a few times, and then eventually it learns, okay, these guys aren't going to let me have these bananas. So the scientists did this one by one. They replaced each of the original monkeys until none of the original monkeys were left in the cage. And a very interesting thing happened, is no matter how many monkeys they replaced, they would continue to jump on the monkey that got on the ladder and beat him up, even though none of the monkeys in the cage at this point had ever been shocked. So they didn't know why they were doing what they were doing. All they knew is they had been beaten up when they tried to do that. And so they were going to perpetuate this. All right? What is my point? My point is that this is what we are doing as human beings. There was a point in time maybe when sex before marriage was a very bad thing, or sex out of wedlock, or having children out of wedlock, or eating pork, or any number of things that we have been told not to do. And these things have been written into our spiritual traditions, into our religions, into our cultures, into our laws, all kinds of things. And they perpetuate themselves. Each generation of human being learns from the generation before it. This is bad, this is evil, don't do it. And unless they're awake enough, they don't question. They just do. They don't question it. They don't say, well, why? Or maybe when they're young, they do. They say, why? And their parents say, just because. Or it says here in this book that you're really going to piss off God if you do that. And so we all learn these things, and usually we're very little when we learn them, and we haven't developed our rationality. We're not fully developed, and we just accept. And unless we go back when we're older and re-examine, is that really true, what I've been told? Then we tend to just perpetuate these things. And so from where I stand and what I see, a lot of the pain and misery that we are creating for ourselves and for others and other species on this planet is the result of these unexamined beliefs and ideas that maybe at one time were absolutely essential for life to continue, for human life to continue, that if we didn't follow these rules, we would get into a lot of trouble. But the landscape that we live in has really changed. And the technology has really changed our life. And a lot of these things we need to re-examine and look at so that we can stop doing what the monkeys were doing, which is beating one another up for no real reason. All right, let's unwind from that. Come back onto our back. Let's feel that rebound. Ooh. And then bringing your legs in and giving them a nice squeeze. And again, moving around with the intention of bringing some relief to the different joints and muscles that have been exercised in that last set. Okay, so I'm going to turn the screen off because you don't need to see me for this next portion of the practice. We've got a little bit of time to do a little bit of yoga nidra. In psychology, a version of this is usually called progressive relaxation. And it is tends to be very relaxing. It tends to help with stress-related disorders. But it also can be a very deep spiritual practice. Today, we won't have time to go that deep. So I would say probably that most of the benefit will just be a sense of relaxation. So if you're new to this, if you're watching this later, I think Ariel has done this with me a few times, but if you're watching this later, you're new, what you'd like to do is unwind onto your back, maybe put a bolster under your knees. If you're at all cold, cover yourself with a blanket. And adjust yourself, make yourself very, very comfortable. And then once you're comfortable, you'd like to set the intention to allow your body to remain still throughout the practice. You'd also like to set the intention to remain alert or aware and not actually doze off to sleep. If you should sleep, you'll still get benefits, but you get the most benefit from staying in a state where you're still conscious, you're very relaxed, but you are also aware. Let's begin our practice today by taking a nice full deep breath in, and we'll exhale with a deep sigh. And again, let's take a nice deep breath in, and we will exhale with a deep sigh. Let it all out. Good. Now just let your breath be natural. And just begin to follow your breathing. Allow each breath to carry you a little bit deeper into this sense of relaxation. There's absolutely no point in trying to relax because the very effort to relax will interfere with the relaxation. So interestingly, relaxation cannot be forced. It cannot be worked on. You just simply relax and let go. The less you try to relax, the more you do relax. Today, I'd like to give you the opportunity to work with a personal intention called a sankalpa. And you want to stick with the same sankalpa until either it manifests or until something more important seems to take its place. For instance, if you had an intention or sankalpa to make $1 million, and then you found out you had cancer, you might change your sankalpa to I am healthy instead of I am wealthy. Choose something that's important to you, turn it into a short phrase or statement, and make sure your statement is in the first person, present tense, and uses only positive language. Then repeat this intention to yourself silently 3 times. Then take your attention or awareness down to your 10 toes. Now, the ankles. The knees. your pelvis, abdomen, chest, fingers, wrists, elbows, shoulders, throat, chin, face, head, the back of your head, the shoulder blades, your back, buttocks, thighs, calves, heels, and soles of both feet. Now the entire body. Feel the body very naturally and easily move into an even deeper state of relaxation. No effort is required. Effort will only interfere with the relaxation. All right, so you can continue with your relaxation if you like. That's what I might actually recommend. However, if you want to begin to move your fingers and your toes and wake yourself back up, you can do that as well. I want to thank you for joining me. And if there's any way that I can help support you during this time, let me know. The beauty of having done this work for several decades is, despite all the uncertainty and change that's occurring, it doesn't stress me out, at least so far. Who knows, maybe something will happen tomorrow and I'll get stressed out. But what I find is, generally doing this work, it makes it easier and easier for you to adapt and to adjust and to accept change that occurs. There's been a lot of change in my life. You know about my father. So it's not like I'm exempt from the change, but I just find that emotionally, mentally, I can handle it. So what that means is I can be available to others who might be having more difficulty, and I might be able to make some suggestions. So happy to do that for you if you want to reach out. Otherwise, have a lovely week. I'd love to see you next Wednesday. We've got Vinyasa at 4:45 and Yin at 6. have a lovely week, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you.